So hello and welcome to Mito Foundation's webinar today on Mito Foundation's Emerging Scientist Fund. My name's Sean Murray. I'm the CEO of the Mito Foundation, and I'd like to begin firstly by acknowledging the traditional lands from where we may gather today, whether you're joining us on this live stream or watching a recording later. I'm joining today from the lands of the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present, and particularly acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in today's webinar. So we at the Mito Foundation are proud to have called out a focus area on this, this part of the research program that Mito Foundation supports. And in particular, this area is called our Emerging Scientist Fund. And I'm joined today, it's my great pleasure to welcome Diana Stojanovski. Di is from the Bio21 Institute in Victoria, in Melbourne, and is really one of the, an inspiring member of this Mito research community. I've had the privilege and pleasure of hearing Di present a few times, and I always come away learning that there's a whole lot that I really don't know about mitochondrial disease. And so I am pretty much in awe of Di and her work. I will let Di introduce herself in due course, and Di's going to talk a little bit about some of her work and the relevance really of the Mito Foundation's focus on emerging scientists. So emerging scientists really are those scientists who are at the earlier stages of their research career. And as a scientist, perhaps finishing the formal part of their education, they're faced with a decision to make. Where do I go? What do I do? And why would somebody choose to research mitochondrial disease over another area of research? Part of that may really relate to the type of work that they've done in their earlier education. But sometimes having some funding available and some funding support to support their work in their next stages of their career can really guide them into the field that they choose. And that's really part of the objectives of the Mito Foundation's Emerging Scientist Fund. We know that it's a competitive space, and we know that we want to attract the best researchers in the world and in Australia to the field of mitochondrial disease research. And that's really, in broad terms, what this fund aims to achieve. Now, Mito Foundation has been supporting emerging scientists since its inception. And in fact, the first 3 grants that Mito Foundation awarded were to PhD students. So students who just finished their undergraduate degree and were looking to commence their doctorates. And there were 3 researchers who received PhD scholarships from the Foundation's first tranche of fundraising that we did. And I had the pleasure just recently, a week ago, of seeing one of those scientists who's still connected with us. This is some 15 years later, and their career has progressed, and it's a real privilege to have seen their career progress and to see some of the really impactful work that they're doing. So we'll get on to the formalities here and the substance of our presentation, and we'll hand over to Di, who certainly has been a beneficiary of some of the Mito Foundation's funding in this emerging scientist area, and is really now leading that next stage of work and mentoring, guiding, and attracting more emerging scientists into the field that have in turn generated some support from Mito Foundation. So please welcome Associate Professor Diana Stojanovski. Over to you, Di.
Thanks so much, Sean. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Yes, as Sean just indicated, I'm from the Bio21 Institute, which is actually a part of the University of Melbourne. I am a researcher, but what I want to give you today is not so much a big focus on the research we're doing. I will touch on it because I'm very passionate about it, but I want to provide more of a snapshot of how the foundation has really helped me navigate, I guess, the last 10 years of my career with some really crucial funding, and how in doing that, I guess, they have created this really great relationship where now I serve as an advocate for the Mito community and want to give back as much as I can to the foundation and the community as a way to say thank you for all that support that I've received in the last decade. Okay. So just to begin, to showcase where we as molecular biologists sit in the pyramid of life. So many people with Mito would come into contact with a lot of doctors and clinicians, and, they are focusing sort of on this aspect where we're looking at how the human is impacted by disease. But as a molecular biologist, what we are really focusing on in the context of Mito is at the cellular level, and how these little structures, which we all know and love, mitochondria, how they are specifically impacted in the context of disease. So just to give you some background, I guess, to my career and my career training, as an undergraduate PhD, and then for a number of years, I worked overseas in Germany. My work really focused on what we call fundamental mitochondrial biology. So this was no real connection to disease, but just a real passion and desire to understand how cells work and how mitochondria work. And I guess at that point in my career, I didn't realize how significant and pivotal that training in mitochondrial biology would be for me as a lab as we transitioned to research mitochondrial disease in sort of this latter decade of my life. So in 2013, I was recruited to the University of Melbourne to start my own research lab. And at that time, it was still driven by fundamental biology. But in 2015, my first PhD student made our first discovery and connection to mitochondrial disease. And we did some work on a protein that was associated with this disease called Sanger syndrome. And our work on Sanger syndrome was published in a very reputable journal in 2017. And immediately upon publishing this work, within 2 weeks, so hot off the press, a number of individuals from around the world, clinicians, and more importantly, families that had been affected by Sanger syndrome started to contact me. And this was some of my first connections, I guess, with people in the Mito community. And it really, I have to say, really resonated with me. I think in particular because I was at a point in my life where I was establishing a family and having young children and conversing with mothers who had children born with Sanger syndrome really created this sort of emotional connection for me. And as a way, at that point in time, I made a very conscious decision actually to transition a lot of the lab projects from more of your fundamental biology to mitochondrial disease biology, basically. And so since 2017, I'm happy to say that the lab has really pushed forward and chased this very specific agenda in mitochondrial disease research. But it is, of course, underscored by much of our knowledge and passion in fundamental mitochondrial biology. So this monster of a table, from a biologist's perspective, is why mitochondrial biology is so fascinating, or mitochondrial disease is so fascinating. But from the perspective of the disease, it's what makes mitochondrial diseases so challenging. And that is that there are many genes that can be mutated and give rise to mitochondrial disease. So this is not a condition like cystic fibrosis where we have one gene and one gene only to analyze. This is not a condition like Huntington's disease where there is only one gene mutated and therefore one gene and one protein to analyze. You can see we have greater than 350 genes, I believe now is the tally, that are all connected to mitochondrial diseases. And this makes a vastly challenging landscape from the perspective of understanding the molecular mechanisms that drive these diseases, but also from the understanding of, the pathological sort of perspectives of these diseases. So our lab looks at genes of interest, and I'm not going to go into the categories of these, but what we are driving with collaborators is a very personalized approach to mitochondrial disease, where we want to uncover what goes wrong in every single disease. So let's say, we are interested in this TIM8A gene. We want to uncover what is happening in the mitochondria of that patient that leads to dysregulation of mitochondrial function that ultimately leads to disease. And this personalized approach to mitochondrial disease is something that we are driving and pushing forward over the next few years. So I've just touched on that, so I'll move forward. So as I was transitioning the lab, I guess, into this more mitochondrial disease research space, I got introduced to the foundation, and in time we have developed this really lovely working relationship. And if you go to the website, and you may be aware of this, there are a number of funding opportunities for researchers like myself. That at the time when I engaged, I was a bit more junior, so I would have been considered an emerging researcher at that time. And I've put a tick next to the funding that I have personally benefited from. And the key ones are these two top ones up here. So in 2019, I was awarded a research fellowship from the foundation. This is a 2-year fellowship of $100,000 per annum, so it makes a significant contribution to your salary. And in addition to this, a few years later, I got a booster grant. These are also very important. These are given to people who may have missed out by a narrow margin on a competitively funded grant through our major funding body, the NHMRC. So the funding situation in Australia is very, very challenging, and excellent people are missing out on grants by very narrow margins. And so something like the booster grant ensures that these people who are missing out still have some level of continuity in their work. And indeed, this is what they did for me. So I'll showcase how those have benefited me in a moment. And I will showcase later on how these PhD top-up scholarships, I think, are contributing to the Mito community and the Mito Foundation in a longer term sort of manner. And another important one are these smaller incubator grants. These are $25,000 grants. I've had 2 of these. This is not a large amount of money in the context of research, but it is enough money to help you support a novel idea and to look into that novel idea. And indeed, the 2 novel ideas that I had and that were supported by the foundation turned out to be quite really exciting projects, and they subsequently led to funding from external agencies, and subsequently led to 2 big publications for the lab. So from what can appear as a small pocket of money, I think big things can come to the labs. So for myself, this research fellowship came at a very important time. At this particular point in time, my contract at the university was fixed term, meaning that I did not have a permanent position. And, you know, it was at a challenging time due to the funding situation in Australia. And also at this time, I had just sort of come out of a period of a number of career interruptions because I was having my children. And so this fellowship really helped me transition and gain momentum at that stage in my career where I was coming out of those career interruptions and really trying to grow the lab and develop my profile. And in addition to that fellowship, this booster grant helps support the research initiatives undertaken by the PhD students in the lab. Ultimately, these 2 programs led to a number of very significant findings in the lab and key publications. And as researchers, this is how we are measured in terms of our success, by our outputs. And so to have these outputs, you need to have that financial support. And so, you know, I'm always really indebted to the foundation for that support at that very pivotal time in my career that helped me to get this work out, helped me support students in the lab, but also helped me to forge and support collaborations with local Mito researchers in the community. One particular one is Professor David Thorburn, who's based at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute. And by virtue of that collaboration that we have sort of developed over the last 5 or 6 years, just recently, David and I were successful in getting 4-year funding on our Mito disease programs from the NHMRC in the range of $1.3 million. So, you know, it's really important to see where that, I guess, where the donors' money, that investment in people like myself is transitioning into. And ultimately, it is into, hopefully, successful outcomes like, you know, external funding like this from the NHMRC. So another key, I think, a very important thing that came out from that original funding that helped me transition those more challenging years in my career was that I ultimately transitioned to a permanent position at the University of Melbourne. So this obviously was underscored by some level of success that I attained in my research. With this position, we call these teaching and research positions. So this is a secure academic appointment where one does research, and my research is into mitochondrial disease, but then we also do teaching. 3 years ago, I got an opportunity to teach into what we call the Bachelor of Biomedicine. And this at the University of Melbourne is a degree, a prelude, if you will, to the medical degree. So every year we get about 600 students into this Bachelor of Biomedicine. About 50 to 60% go on to do medicine. 20 to 30 go on to do research, and the others go on to do further education or other work. And when I got this opportunity to run this subject, a subject in this degree, and to actually teach into this one of these subjects, I immediately realized the opportunity really of exposing these particular students to the concepts around mitochondrial disease, okay? Because ultimately many of them will go on to be doctors, and many of them will ultimately engage with our mito community within the hospitals. And something that definitely has always resonated with me when speaking to members of the mito community, in particular those that are facing diagnosis of children in hospitals, is this sense, I guess, of being shoved around from one doctor to another, and just feeling really maybe a lack of support or a lack of empathy in those original stages of their journey. And I felt that that was something we could really start to educate students on, in particular those that will go on to become doctors. And so this is really like a long-term vision of educating our undergraduate students, those that will go on to ultimately impact our community. And so the way I went about this, I won't go through what I teach them at an educational level, but I supplemented my teaching with patient interviews. And through the Mito Foundation, I was put in touch with 3 champions of our community, so Kat, Mia, and Pretty. And they were completely vulnerable and transparent in these interviews, and really help provide such a clear picture of what the journey of a patient or a parent of a patient is like. And the students love these interviews and completely resonate with the stories of the women. And at the end of every year, we ask the students to reflect on one of their key learnings. And I'm very happy to say that the majority of them do pick the mito disease module and topic as something that has inspired them. And here you can just see some of their responses to this. So, a lot of students feel empowered by these particular videos, and it inspires them to make the individuals' lives better. These people, this one here I like is that hearing the patient interview broke down the barrier between the doctor and the patient, and I suddenly became aware of the heartbroken mother in this case. This student has been inspired to do mitochondrial disease research, and this student has been inspired to view patients at a deeper level. So this is really, grassroots, I think, having an impact through a researcher like myself who does teaching, but having a broader impact for our community and exposing the broader community to mitochondrial disease. Beyond the undergraduates, we have to think about our next generation of researchers, and this is very important, and this is where PhD students come into the mix, and this is where that PhD top-up scholarship is very important. That's provided through the Mito Foundation. These are just 6 of my students that have come through the lab as PhD students, and all of the students in this slide have had the Mito Foundation top-up or the Mito Foundation top-up scholarship, except Yilin, but I put Yilin here because she's that student who made that original discovery on Senger's syndrome and really helped transition the lab into mitochondrial disease research. But I want to touch on Yilin, Tom, and Alex because they are alumni of the lab and they are the future, and I'll show you why in a moment. But Jordan, Phoebe, and Megan are current students, and they are all excellent, doing amazing research in the mito space. These alumni have gone on in some capacity in mitochondrial research, but they all have visions to come back to Australia and continue in mitochondrial disease research. So Yilin finished her PhD. She moved to another mitochondrial disease lab in Helsinki, and she was supported in that time there by one of the most prestigious fellowships in Europe through the EMBO organisation. And Yilin has now reached the end of her time in Finland and has plans to come back to Australia next year, looking at a mito disease research program that looks around variable age of onset and also environmental risk factors and how this induces mitochondrial disease. So here we have, a young researcher that's come through our lab, has gone on to gain external training internationally, and now wants to come back and contribute broader to the community in Australia and mito research in Australia. Tom just finished a few years ago in the lab. He moved to Harvard and now is working in a big lab on mitochondrial metabolism. And he has goals to come back to Australia and look at metabolic regulation in mitochondrial disease. And Alex has just recently moved to Cambridge, and there he is acquiring knowledge in this thing we call organoids. Organoids are basically organs that can be grown in a petri dish. And Alex has aspirations to come back to Australia and grow brains in a petri dish and do mitochondrial disease research in association with neurodegenerative disorders and using organoids as a model. So, you know, for me, it always thrills me when I see the students from the lab going on to do amazing things, but it's also so important as a researcher to leave a legacy of, you know, younger, newer researchers that will continue that pipeline for us. As you know, some of us become senior and may move on to other roles within the university or externally. It's really important to support the younger community and ensure that they are provided with opportunities so they can flourish and then develop their own careers, and that we have this continuous cycle of people contributing to the foundation and to the Mito community. And on that note, I will just end by thanking all my past and current lab members. I'm nothing without them. And really a very big heartfelt thank you to the Mito Foundation for their continued support and to the researchers in the Australian community. So thank you.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Di. It's just so amazing to have seen how you present about your journey in this space and how some of those precious funds have really helped seed really what looks like a blossoming body of amazing humans doing some amazing work for this Mito community. Yeah, amazing. And I was just checking while you were presenting, and my suspicions were correct. You were the very first recipient of a Mito Foundation Research Fellowship.
Correct.
I think the project code on our system is F001. You're number one, and we might not have even had code numbers back when you got that. So how amazing to have seen your, you know, to have witnessed from the sidelines your journey in this, and to see you now leading a stellar crew. I was really impressed, particularly around a few elements of what you'd said there. The funding, the sort of seed funding concept that touched on, but not only to see you grow within Mito Foundation funding, but attracting funding from other sources. The big wins there around things like that NHMRC grant. That's right. You know, that we often talk, and particular supporters of Mito Foundation's work often are interested in this multiplier effect. You know, for every dollar we might invest, what does it actually turn into? When I say we invest, we're just the stewards of donations. Yes. And many listening to this presentation may have been an existing contributor to this sort of fund, or be considering that. And you know, can you talk a little bit about that? Absolutely. Multiplier effect?
I think, for me, that research fellowship was particularly important for many women. I was at that sort of career stage where I was having my family, and just the declining funding rate in Australia makes it very challenging whether you have children or not, actually. So what you'll see is a lot of women at that career stage opt to leave academia, and ultimately then I would have left mitochondrial disease research. And I think you can see that the impact, if I had left, the impact that would have had on these younger researchers, but also through my teaching, I think that ability to educate the broader community on mitochondrial disease. So just that, you know, $200,000 in the scheme of things that supported me really just gave me a few years to recover from my career interruptions, and then just really get the ball rolling. And yeah, I think for me, it was just beyond that. It was, I felt like I could fly, I guess, once I had a period of recovery. Yeah.
And the aspect you'd mentioned, I hadn't considered, but the teaching aspect, and particularly in the medical community, the thing we hear time and time again from our community members is, I can't find a doctor who knows anything about mitochondrial disease. And that is a massive undertaking to shift the needle in that regard. But the role you're playing there, this is, you know, it's akin to the Emerging Scientist Fund. It's planting these seeds in these emerging professionals in the earlier stages of their career, so that for, you know, maybe in hopefully not too long, but you know, definitely for the next generations to come, hopefully some of those challenges.
And I've seen the benefits of that. Or so, like, you know, 5 years ago, I would have gone into a room with undergraduates and asked, who knows what mitochondrial disease is? And you might have got a few hands up. But a few weeks ago, I was doing a career discussion, and I didn't know who the audience would be, but I said, I'm going to be talking about mitochondrial disease. Does anyone know what mitochondrial disease is? And about 60% of the room put their hand up. And I asked, are you all biomed students? Is this because I've lectured you? And their answer was yes. So within that sort of 2-year period, the jump in knowledge has been, tremendous. And they will all go on to be doctors. These are amazing students. They will all go on to do amazing things. And I think it's really important just to spread awareness in that way as well. It can have big impact in a longer term.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Well, it's been a real privilege, as I mentioned, to witness some of that. The other aspect you've talked about, which isn't directly related to the Emerging Scientist Fund per se, but it's really important, that the concept around engaging with community as a researcher. Mito Foundation's been involved through various scientific conferences and information days, etc. And time again, we hear from researchers about the value, the grounding, the inspiration they get from connecting directly with community members.
Yeah, I think it's pivotal. And for me, like I said, it was just that correspondence through email with people, with mothers, it was 2 mums in particular, whom I think in the email, it was clear they weren't looking for a cure or anything like that, but I just sensed complete desperation, and they seemed so happy that they found someone who was working on the disease that their child had. So you could see that they felt completely isolated and lonely until that particular paper came out. Yeah, and that just really resonated with me. And I feel a lot of researchers, when they do have an opportunity to engage with patients or family members of patients, it really does change their perspective and definitely provides, motivation to want to contribute, absolutely, in a positive way.
Yeah, amazing. Just amazing. Well, I think we're just about up for time there. So thank you again, Di. And for those of you listening in, our thanks to you for your interest or engagement in some of this work that the Mito Foundation is doing, in however you've engaged or are interested in that work, whether it's personally or philanthropically. We'd certainly urge you to give some consideration to the role that you might be able to play in this important work. Whether it's making a pledge to support the fund or introducing us to new philanthropic or corporate supporters who may be able to support the fund, or another idea. We will certainly be in touch with you all individually and discuss how we can continue this journey together, because as you have seen through Di's experience, I think these investments in this type of work certainly has its rewards in the medium to longer term. So thank you again, Di. It is always a pleasure to see you, and I'm absolutely inspired by the work that you do. And thank you for anyone tuning in today for your interest. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you again.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you.